Hey everyone, my name is Lily and I'm the book blogger behind Utopia State of Mind, and I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on my Siege and Storm reading reaction video. I'm going to be talking about my reading thoughts while reading Siege and Storm. I'm about halfway through, but before I do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about my Shadow and Bone reading reaction video because I've been having some thoughts about it. So basically, I just wrote my review for Shadow and Bone yesterday, and writing it down gave me a little bit more of clarity than I had when I was kind of just filming it to you. By now you will have seen the Shadow and Bone reaction video, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about some things that I had or some thoughts that I had as well. When I was talking about Shadow and Bone, I was like, oh yeah, I would still give it a 3-star. And as I was thinking about it, I actually was more like, my thoughts for it, at least on Goodreads, and they're like a whole nother issue when you think about star ratings versus like the vibe a book gives you, right? So on Goodreads, technically 2 stars is it was okay, 3 stars you liked it, 4 stars is you really liked it, and 5 is it's amazing. So when I was thinking about it, and I was like trying to be somewhere between a 2 and a 3, right? So I thought it was okay and I liked it, but I was like, when I was looking at my actual Excel sheet of all of these other ratings that I'd given books for 3 stars, I kind of realized that I would probably be more, it would feel like a little bit wrong to give it the same rating as the other ones. And of course, that brings up a huge conversation about book star ratings and like also why I just generally don't love star ratings, because it's like, I think that they're so subjective, and also like for each specific book and each genre and stuff, they're just so different for me. At least like a 3-star fantasy, if it was in a contemporary, it might be more like a 4-star, and like there are some sort of things about each genre that I need more. So for example, in fantasy, if you don't have a really great world building thing, I can't. Like the whole part of a lot of fantasy worlds are that they're secondary worlds, and so they have to have a strong world building foundation. And if I have a lot of questions about that, generally I think that that's kind of okay, not irredeemable, that seems like way too harsh of a word, but basically that's a lot harder for me to forgive when I think about star ratings. So, you know, it's something that I'm not really totally like set on in my own head when I think about star ratings and stuff, and so it's something that I could talk about, I guess, in like a future video, because I'm not really sure how I feel. But anyway, I just wanted to say that I was thinking about what I would rate it, and I actually think that on Goodreads I gave it a 2 stars. I narrowed down my reactions to Shadow and Bone in 3 kind of reasons, or 3 topics, and that's going to be in my written review. A lot of them are very similar, but one of the ones that I didn't really mention in my Shadow and Bone reading reaction vlog thing was that some of it is like the importance of Shadow and Bone in 2012. So I didn't read Shadow and Bone in 2012, I read it in 2021. And so I think that the fantasy landscape is just so different now, and I'm trying to think about like books I read in 2012. I wasn't reading anyway in 2012, and so I was thinking about like even growing up as like a late teen, I just switched straight into adult books. And so I was thinking about like, coming from my perspective, reading it in 2021, I can't comment on the impact or significance of Shadow and Bone in 2012. So I can't comment on like how maybe this was a super important book at the time that like, you know, helped rocket up YA fantasy, or even, you know, in the time between 2012 and 2021. I just can't really talk about that because I'm not clued in enough. I wasn't really reading at 2012 when I started my blog in like 2016 basically, so 4 years after Shadow and Bone was published, and with the majority of the trilogy had to have been published by 2016. I just can't really comment on it, right? I think the third one, Rune and Rising, was 2017, and that was just a year after I started blogging, and I started blogging in 2016 in March, so it wasn't even a full calendar year at that point in 2017. And so it's like, I don't want to say that I can comment on the significance and the importance of Shadow and Bone to the YA bookish community, or like to the YA sphere in general. So I just wanted to clarify that as well, because I feel like I kind of alluded to the fact that, you know, maybe this was just a right time, wrong place kind of thing, where it was like, or wrong place, wrong time. I don't really know how to describe it, but basically like that I'm of course A, not the target audience for Shadow and Bone, and B, it's like I'm discovering it in a much different context than when it was actually written, and how does that impact my own reactions to it. And that's definitely why I was wavering between 2 and 3 stars, because it's like, for me now in 2021, based on the hype, based on everything I've read so far in YA fantasy between, you know, 2016 and 2021, like for me it felt more standard fantasy. And for me, I guess I was expecting more things, let's just say, like the anti-hero vibes, right? I will talk about that in a second, I promise. But anyway, so in this context, in this time, in this place that I'm reading it at, for me it was more of a 2-star book. And not in a like I didn't like it 2-star, but as in I liked it, but it was just like one of those books where I liked it. I'm not sure if I would necessarily recommend it, and I might be just digging myself in a larger hole at this point. But I'm just trying to give a little bit more context about, if you've seen my review, or if you've seen my Goodreads review, or my rating, or like anything of that, just trying to give a little bit more context about how this idea of right time, right place is so crucial when you find a book. So when, you know, I've picked up a book that I read and didn't really like, but then I read it again. For example, I read Parable of the Sower. I read it when I was in college, and I was just like, it's okay, like I didn't love it. And then I read it again, and I liked it a little bit more. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, when you discover a book, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of the journey for you and that book. So hopefully that gives a little bit more context about my feelings regarding the ratings and the star reviews and everything about Shadow and Bone. And I did want to talk about something that will kind of bring me into my thoughts also on Siege and Storm, was that like a lot of people kept saying that the Darkling was a very good morally gray villain, right? That's something that people have said up to me, and I just don't see it. And I'm not sure if I missed it in Shadow and Bone, but I just felt like I didn't really feel like he was morally gray, right? So maybe at the beginning when he's like, oh, you're gonna help me save the world, and like we're gonna be great together, but then at the end of Shadow and Bone, you're pretty convinced that like he actually doesn't want to save the world. He wants to make the world worse. And also, like, I guess for me, it's morally gray. I think it's also so subjective, but I think for me it's like, when I think about morally gray villains, I think of a villain who is so convinced that they're right, and they're maybe doing the right thing but the wrong way about it. So something where there's all of that nebulous kind of thing in between it. And for me, the concept of morally gray villain, and please let me know in the comments below what your concept is so we can like chat about it, but for me, that's what it is. And so for me, the Darkling isn't trying to do the right thing the wrong way, or the right thing the questionable way. For me, it's pretty clear, like, this is the wrong way, right? Like, maybe he's trying in his own way to get the world to a state of peace, but it's also like the main villain in my idea of the world is the Fold, and is the Fold like terrorizing people. I don't really see a lot of like inner conflicts between the different countries. For me, it's kind of like the Fold is the negative force, I suppose, in the world, and the Darkling is trying to kind of manage it, but at the same time, the Darkling made the Fold, it seems. So it's kind of like, I don't really feel like he's a morally gray villain or morally gray human or an anti-hero, I guess. And so when I was writing my reviews and also reading other reviews of what people were saying, because I was like, I don't understand, like what is it about him? That was kind of one of the things people were saying. And so for me, when I was thinking about morally gray villains, morally gray heroes, anti-heroes, and etc., I guess it's that like that morally gray ambiguity really draws me to certain characters. And some characters that I can think of in my mind, like T from the Bone Witch, for me, those are more morally gray people, right? Those are more interesting and complex characters than the Darkling. And I think it's also that I feel like I don't really know the Darkling. I feel like we haven't really gotten to know him at all. There's barely anything I know about him. I'm interested though to know from you all what your concepts or what your thoughts are on morally gray villains and stuff in general. So as I said, please leave it below. But anyway, those are kind of the things I wanted to talk about before I dive into the Siege and Storm like reading reaction part. So now we're finally at the part where I talk about my thoughts on Siege and Storm. So I'm about, let's see if I can show you. I'm about like halfway, maybe like a little bit over halfway through Siege and Storm. So I'm gonna kind of read my notes in my head and chat with you about it. So I guess what I've liked so far from this part is that it's very clear to me, and maybe this is just me, it's very clear to me that Alina wants to use her powers, but is also a little bit scared, and also scared of embracing that ambition. And for me, that gave me huge Furyborn vibes, because I think that that is so interesting as a character, because I think that we have this opinion, or we have this stereotype of powerful female characters or powerful heroines where they're like powerful, but they don't want to be powerful, right? So they're kind of like humble about their power, and they're like, oh, you know, I can whatever, do all these cool things, but like I'm just in it for the good of the world, or I'm just in it for this. I don't actually want to use my power. Whereas I feel like we need to read a little bit more about characters in fantasy worlds who are like straight up, yes, ambitious, I want to use my power, using my power feels great, I feel powerful, I love it, I want more power, right? And so that's kind of one of the things that drew me to my copy of Beyond the Ruby Veil. But I definitely get that feeling in Siege and Storm, and so I'm interested to see how that, yeah, so I have this note that says, is there not a part of her that wants to run, that wants to unleash her powers? And I think that that is definitely one of my main thoughts about Siege and Storm, and specifically Alina, because I mean, this trilogy is like almost all Alina, right? Like that, she's the main character. Another thing from Siege and Storm is that Nikolai comes into the book. And so Nikolai starts off as being the Stormhund, or Stormhond. In my notes it says Stormhond, but I think it was Stormhund. Anyway, he comes into it, and I was like, I kind of like Stormhund. And I understand they don't tell truths disguised as lies or gilded falsehood. So what really struck me about him and his crew and stuff at the very beginning when I first met them was that they are who they say they are. They're mercenary, they're trying to like, they're in it for their own gain, and they're not trying to be like, oh, I want to help you because I want to help you, but secretly I want to help myself, which I guess is the vibe I get from the Darkling. And it's the vibe I get from a lot of the other side characters in the world, which is why it's hard for Alina to trust people, and it's hard for Alina to figure out who is her actual ally. So what I appreciated about him was that he is like in it for whatever he wants, and so, and also the side characters he's surrounded by are attracted to that specifically. Like they're all in it for what they are interested in, and for him, maybe he's interested in power and money and all of these different things. And so then when it is revealed that he is actually Nikolai, so the prince of Ravka, or one of the princes of Ravka, at first I was like, oh, actually, wait, that's kind of exactly the opposite of what I was thinking. But as I get to know Nikolai more, and as I said, I'm only halfway through, I feel like that is kind of still who he is, right? He's very much in it for like what he wants, right? And so if Alina was like, yeah, I'll marry you, that's a good idea, then he'd be like, oh, okay, cool, that's what I want. Like, I want to be in power, I want my own goals to be fulfilled. And Alina says, no, I don't want to marry you, I just want to command the Second Army. And it's like, okay, cool, right? It still furthers his own goals, it still furthers his own ambition and what he wants. So I felt like, in some senses, yes, he is lying. Duh, he's lying. But at the same time, the core part of him has sort of remained very similar. And so as I was like in my notes, I was thinking, oh, do I really feel like he was a liar? Do I not? And it's like, I don't feel like he disguised what he truly wanted, which is what was best for him. I think that there are a lot of characters in this book who are trying to say that they're doing it for other things, right? So the Darkling's doing it for everyone else, but actually he just wants power. Or, you know, the Grisha are doing it for the better good, but they actually just want to be on whatever side is winning. Not all Grisha. This is just broad sweeping statements. But anyway, I actually still really like Nikolai. I don't know how my thoughts will change by the end of Siege and Storm, but so far, I kind of like him. I also like how he is very sarcastic and wry, and he's also super clever. So I thought it was interesting because I have this note that says, has this become a dating show with Mal, Nikolai, and the Dark Lane? That is kind of how I feel, where there are all these like three love interest kind of characters who are being introduced and have that kind of romantic-ish tension with Alina. And so I do kind of feel a little bit like that, but I also think that I heard from an author years and years ago, and I don't even remember which author, because I really didn't like love triangles when I first started reading YA books. I was kind of just like, you know, in your character, like internally what you want. And also with love triangles, there can be just a lot of lies and manipulation and like deception sometimes, not all the time. But I was like really turned off by love triangles. And then when I heard this author, I kind of started changing my mind about it, because the author was like something along the lines of, don't see the love triangles as these two options of people. It's two options of different paths in life. Like, it's about what they represent to the character. And I was just like, whoa. Because it's true, right? Like, that's what each character represents. It's not that this character, it's that this character represents duty or, you know, whatever. And so, for example, for me, my thoughts so far on Nikolai, Mal, and the Dark Lane is that the Dark Lane represents not only an acceptance of Alina's powers, because I think Nikolai also accepts her powers, but like he accepts her ambition and he fosters her ambition. And for me, the Dark Lane to Alina recognizes that almost in, as I said, Furyborn vibes, like that building a fire that eventually may consume you, but building it together with someone in a way that the love is almost a little bit too dangerous and a little bit too toxic and intense, but it's like that kind of egging on kind of relationship. And that's what he reminds me of or represents to me for Alina. Whereas Mal at the moment, and this is kind of what some of my notes in the book, it's like Mal to me represents the past of Alina. So for example, I think there are a lot so far in Siege and Storm where Mal is kind of, it's not that he's holding Alina back, but he's like expecting Alina to remain similar. He's expecting her to be like, okay, I'm fine just living in the wilderness with you on the run, or I'm fine settling down with you. And at the moment, that's just not the way Alina can think. Alina has this power and she kind of is duty bound almost to use it. And Alina as a character feels like she is duty bound to use it for the better good. And so I guess for me, Mal represents all of the stuff she used to be. And so the question, I guess, for the series and the question for Alina is either will Mal adapt and see her for who she's trying to become or is, or will Alina decide that like that person that it used to love Mal is not her anymore, basically, one of the two. And for me, Nikolai represents almost this kind of diplomatic way. It's like he represents a perfect kind of ambitious union which could achieve her goals, but is like more power, more like everything that she wasn't expecting, right? So to be commander in an army, or to, you know, be closer to the throne, right? Like he represents these things that scare her because they are so far from what she has ever even thought about, right? So she's just kind of coming to terms with having power and amplifiers and everything like that. And so I almost feel like Nikolai is sort of somewhere in between, or a mishmash, or like I don't have a good enough sense of Nikolai, so I don't have as much to say about him in this third kind of love interest setting. But those are my thoughts about that. That's definitely kind of one of my last thoughts that I have in the second part, or in the first half of Siege and Storm, was just her evolution of her relationship with Mal, and how Mal is kind of this, supposed to be this soft cinnamon boy kind of, who also has these skills in tracking, but who generally just kind of loves Alina, and wants them to be happy, but also, maybe this is just me, but yeah, I'm having a really difficult time with their relationship, only because it does seem so clear to me that Mal is kind of stuck in this nostalgic image of what their past could have been like, and like what their relationship could have been like, but that it just becomes so far past what that could ever possibly be. Like they cannot ever go back to a relationship where that would work. And so I mean, yeah, as I said, I'm interested to see if Mal's relationship will change and stuff like with Alina, and it's like, I don't know. I don't know actually, and I don't know honestly who I like best. I kind of wish Alina could just not feel like she's kind of pulled between these three people, and I'm not saying that she does feel that way, but I do feel like they are definitely side characters to Alina's main character, and I do feel like they're kind of set up as potential love interests. So maybe if they were set up as side characters that would, you know, that would evolve or develop into potential love interests. But for me, when they came in, and that kind of first impression, that tension, that like will they, won't they vibe was introduced very early on in a lot of her, or in my opinion, a lot of her relationships with these three characters. And so yeah, that's kind of why my dating show reference came up. And yeah, I don't know, we'll see how it develops. Oh, and I also do want to say that I'm still, I like Alina better in Siege and Storm than I do in Shadow and Bone. I think maybe it's that we've spent more time with her, but I also felt like I want to see Alina's potential, and I want her to succeed and maybe like burn the whole world down. At this point in the book, in case you didn't know, so she has 2 of the amplifiers and is kind of playing with the idea of getting the 3rd. She's definitely gonna have to get the 3rd. Like, she's definitely, this is what's gonna happen. Especially since I've seen images or whatever from promo for, I think, is it Rule of Wolves? No, I think it's maybe the Lives of Saints, right? So Leigh Bardugo now has so many different kind of Grishaverse stuff where she has like a bird or a pow. I don't know. I think she's gonna find the 3rd one. I'm not worried about that. It might be in Rune and Rising. But yeah, and it's interesting because after this, then I'll finally be able to think about reading King of Scars and Rule of Wolves, which maybe I will do that because I own King of Scars. I pre-ordered it for the pin. We all knew that was gonna happen. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure what will happen with that. I probably will, because then it will like get more books off of my shelf that I've read. So yeah, those are definitely my thoughts on the first half of Siege and Storm. This is the one with the Netflix little thing, which I hate so much, but I've only got this copy recently, and now like everything I'm finding has this Netflix sticker, which isn't even a sticker, it's printed on here, this Netflix dust jacket, and I don't like it. But when I first got Shadow and Bone years ago, like at least 3 years ago, if not longer, there was no Netflix series, so the cover didn't have this, and I kind of wish that when I got it, I was like, oh yeah, even though I got this as a birthday present, I'll get the other 2. At that point, I was just like, maybe I don't want to read the other 2. Maybe there'll be never a chance in my life where I'll want to do that. And then here I am, doing it only for the sake of YouTube. I honestly, 3 or 4 years ago, when I got this, never thought that I was going to have a YouTube, and never thought that this was going to be my life. So, whenever I filmed that. So, I will see you in the second half of this video whenever I film it. And for me, it will be days. For you, it will be like a matter of seconds. I'm going to react now to the second part of Shadow and Bone. For you, it's been a couple seconds. For me, it's been a couple days. And so I'm just going to read through my notes and then talk about my final thoughts on Siege and Storm. I don't know if I said Shadow and Bone before, but I meant Siege and Storm. So my first note, which is very much in line with what I said earlier in the video, which is get with the times, Mal. So I guess one of my, you know what, why bother doing this till now? One of my main thoughts about the second half of the book is that very much one of what I was talking about before, where Mal is very much wanting Alina from before, like, Shadow and Bone, essentially. Which is just, like, before Shadow and Bone, you basically weren't really together, so I'm not really sure what kind of Alina he wants. Basically, he just wants the Alina, like, before she got real powerful. And the whole conflict, I think, for me, at least in the second part, or for Alina, not me, is that Alina wants to use her powers. She wants to be compassionate and to save people. Like, that's what she wants. And so she can never go back to the past Mal. She just can't. And so that is like the major conflict in my mind for the second half of Siege and Storm, which is like what I was saying. Mal represents a version of Alina that like will never come back, essentially, and also a version of Melina. That's what I've put them together, Melina. A version of Alina that she doesn't want back. It's not only that she can never go back, she doesn't want to go back. You know, there are some moments where she's like, oh, you know, what if we just like run away or whatever? And Mal's like, you don't want that. Like, how long would we stay away for? That's the truth about Alina now, is that that's just not the person Alina is anymore. And if Mal keeps kind of trying to push her back, they're just never going to work out. Like, at this point, for me, I'm kind of over Mal and Alina, just because I was hoping that throughout Siege and Storm, Mal would like get over it and eventually be like, okay, this is who you are. I love that you want to care about people. So yes, I wish that we could just like run away to a cottage and live happily ever after. But you, as the core of who you are, have always wanted to help people and have always wanted to like see that in other people. And so that part of Alina really hasn't changed. She just now has the power to use it and enact that desire. So I don't know. It reminds me of this thing where I was reading in a different book, and I also don't remember what the book is, but they were saying this, like, I think it was the Infinity Quartz. So do we have good people or just simply people who don't have the power? And, you know, I think that kind of is what Alina's kind of dealing with, right? Like, Alina may have always been a good person, but now that she has the power to do good, is that like where she's going to go? Is that what she's going to do? And it seems like that is what she's going to do. So I definitely feel like, goodbye Mal, like, see ya. And it definitely reminded me of the song Peace by Taylor Swift, right? And so just this idea that like, if you can't handle everything that is, you know, a consequence of being around or being with the person that you love, it's not going to work out. That's just kind of how it is. And so another thing I was thinking about as well is like, everyone who supported the Darkling, like David, like Zoya, like all of these other people, are these bystanders really any less guilty? And I think as the book progresses, or as the series progresses in Rune Rising, maybe we'll see a little bit more nuance with like people like David, who maybe believed in power or believed in what he could do, or people like Zoya, who now are changed by what he has done. So how much guilt do they have for enabling the Darkling? How much guilt do they have for like supporting him? And how much is their loyalty worth now that they've changed sides? But like, what are the consequences of those actions? What are the consequences of people who are still on the Darkling side? Like, how responsible are they for their actions? I definitely hope is going to be discussed more in Rune and Rising, which I will read. I'm taking a few days off because I've basically gone like straight into it. Anyway, I just realized I didn't have Siege of Storm in the frame, so there you go. I'll put it back later. And then, what other thoughts did I have? Oh, another thought that I had really early on, kind of before Alina explicitly says it later, is that saints live short and tragic lives. So in this second part specifically, Alina is coming into contact more with all those people who believe that she's a saint. Do you really want to be a saint? Because it's clear that she doesn't really want to be a saint, and people are kind of putting her on this sainthood pedestal. So Alina will later on more explicitly be like, yo, heroes are dying like everywhere. I don't want to be dead, essentially, which, you know, that makes a lot of sense. And so yeah, a lot of my notes in the second half are just wondering if Mal and Alina can reconcile their differences. And also, I think in the second half of Siege and Storm, I really got to know a little bit more about Nikolai, who seems to genuinely care about the country and the people within it. And so it's like, at this point, who do I ship with Alina? I kind of just wish that Alina could be like, peace, I'm doing my own thing, like, I don't need any of y'all. I don't know if that's how it's gonna go, but that's kind of what I want. If I had to pick, though, between the three, I guess I would pick Nikolai, because I don't think Mal and Alina can reconcile that difference. I think that the Darkling is being a little creepy by, like, coming in all the time and, like, hanging out in her room. And I also feel like if we look at it on a spectrum of, like, who all these three kind of love interests. We have very much Mal, who's past Alina, and then we have sort of the Darkling, which represents kind of what would happen if she truly kind of fell headfirst into this power vortex that she has the possibility of doing without feeling compelled to care about ethics and human lives and sacrifices and all of this stuff and like compassion. And I definitely think the Darkling represents giving into this pursuit of power and giving into what would happen if she just like gave into all of these desires she has for power, and how that would change her essentially. Oh, I have a note that says Vasily should just run away on a horse. I don't really like him, and I know that we're not really supposed to, and we also don't get enough information to form any other opinion than the perspective we're seeing in the text, which is through Alina's perspective, who doesn't really like Vasily. But it's also like, especially at the very end where Vasily's like, oh, I've done this really great thing and now we've allied, and Nikolai's just like, what did you do? And then it's like, and yeah, that's me reenacting what happened in that scene before like things caught fire essentially. Oh, and then I have another note where it's like, I mean, it's end of the road for Mal and Alina anyway, bye. Because that's how I feel. I just feel like we spent all of Siege and Storm kind of being like, will they, won't they, can they work this out, can they not work this out, can Mal accept Alina? The answer seems pretty much to me like no, so gotta just, yeah. Oh, I also had a logistical question, right? So at the very end, when she is with the Darkling, and she like uses his power against him and is kind of like, oh, you should have just let me kill the Darkling and also die myself so that I could like end the Darkling and his reign of terror essentially. But I was wondering, if that happened though, what happens to the Fold? Like, is their eventual goal kill the Darkling so the Fold just magically disappears? Like, is that what they think is gonna happen? I don't know. I want to know what they think is gonna happen. So that's something that I was thinking about. Also, I was thinking about the ending, especially because I love how it has these after chapters, which aren't explicitly epilogues. They're just kind of like almost looking from a bird's eye view about what is happening. But it's that she needs to be more than a queen, more than a commander, something entirely different, like a firebird. I love the iconography of firebirds in general, so kind of like phoenixy firebirds, where it symbolizes rebirth and it symbolizes resurrection and like coming from the ashes to be something completely different essentially. And so I really like that imagery for sure. And I mean, I knew that I know she's probably gonna find the firebird. I guess it's gonna happen in Rune Rising, which makes sense because like this one is a snake. What is Shadow and Bone? I felt like the one for Ruin and Rising is a bird. Oh, and Shadow and Bone is a stag. So I'm caught on to that one now. So I guess it's like this is the first amplifier. That kind of sea dragon-y thing is the second amplifier, and the third one, the Firebird, will be the third amplifier. So I get it now. Took me a while, but I got it. Just put that back, and let's see, what other notes? Oh, so my general thoughts about Siege and Storm. I definitely like this one better than Shadow and Bone, just because we got to know Alina more, we got to know Nikolai more, we got to know Nikolai, period. And so what I didn't like about it is that I think as a general kind of plot movement, there's a lot of kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, and at the end I'm kind of like, you have lost a lot. And so plot-wise, I felt like this one has kind of a middle book syndrome kind of feel, where I'm kind of like, okay, stuff happened, but like ultimately in the end, we're kind of just back more or less at the start. No, not really shade. Like, there isn't anything I'm against on that one, because I do think there were very much developments that had to happen, and also kind of setbacks that had to happen. But when I think about like plot-wise, how I feel about the plot for Siege and Storm, I'm kind of like, meh. I don't really feel like it had huge kind of like, oh my god, right? I felt like a lot of things were 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And as I said, I think maybe this one I like it a lot better than Shadow and Bone. Things I was still frustrated with were Melina. just because I felt like we often have in a lot of these series like will they, won't they couple pairings, and so for me I was just kind of like, ugh, the writing's in the wall, just, you know, just do this. And so I definitely like seeing Alina's character development in this one, especially as she realizes like she can never really go back. Like there is no back ever. And I think that that's a pivotal moment for a character to think about, is knowing that even if you could go back in time, you would not be the same person you are. Even if you could go back to living in a cottage, like you wouldn't not be happy, and that's Mal's point, right? She would not be happy with that life anymore. And so I do think that if I had to think about my feelings for Siege and Storm, that kind of sums up my feelings, is like, Alina, you can never go back to being that person you used to be. Like, that's just not the person you are anymore. And yeah, that would be my main feeling about that one. In general, I like Siege and Storm a little bit more than I like Shadow and Bone. I don't know if I'm gonna bump it all the way up to 3. Shadow and Bone was like a 2-star, kind of like, it was an okay book. I definitely like Siege and Storm more, but I don't know if I like it a whole star more. But we'll see. As I go into Ruin and Rising in a couple days, I will let you know how I feel. Definitely feel like if I weren't reading this for YouTube and I weren't reading this for the Netflix thing, I probably wouldn't continue reading it. But I am excited to see Alina with this Firebird, and I am excited to see her become a new person and not have kind of like Mal and that attachment and wanting to be a person you can never be holding her back. So yeah, I hope you had a fun time watching so far 1 and 2, and we will catch ya for 3 when we read it. Anyway, have a great day, and I'll leave links obviously, but like you can find the link for Siege and Storm. I'll leave my links below, which you might not be able to find. And yeah, have a great day. Bye.